You clean that black stain above the bathroom ceiling. 2 weeks later, it comes back. You spray bleach on it. The smell disappears for a while. Then spring arrives, the air gets humid again, and the same dark spot slowly crawls across the corner like nothing ever happened. So you buy a dehumidifier, then moisture absorbers, then anti-mold paint. And somehow the problem still keeps returning. Now imagine fixing all of that with something thinner than a pencil. Just a bare copper wire running quietly along the foundation of the house. No chemicals, no filters, no machines running all day. Sounds ridiculous, right? That's exactly what I thought too. But the strange part is, versions of this idea have existed for a very long time. Long before modern mold remediation companies. Long before air purifiers. Long before people started sealing homes so tightly that moisture had nowhere left to escape. Some older farmhouses in Pennsylvania used grounding methods involving copper near damp foundations and storage rooms for decades. And the deeper I looked into it, the more I realized this story wasn't really about mold. It was about the way older homes were designed to deal with moisture completely differently than modern ones.
The weird thing about mold is that most people think the mold itself is the problem. Usually, it isn't. Mold is what happens after moisture has already been sitting somewhere for too long. And modern homes are surprisingly good at trapping moisture, especially newer homes. Everything today is sealed. Tighter insulation, energy-efficient windows, synthetic materials, less airflow. That saves energy, but it also means humidity gets trapped inside walls, ceilings, bathrooms, basements, and crawl spaces much more easily than people realize. Older homes were different. They leaked air constantly, which sounds bad, until you realize that airflow naturally carried moisture back outside. A lot of old farmhouses breathed. Modern homes don't. That's why bathrooms fog up faster now. That's why basements feel damp even without flooding. That's why some closets always smell slightly musty no matter how clean they are. And once humidity stays high long enough, mold spores start attaching themselves to surfaces. That part matters because spores already exist almost everywhere. You're breathing them right now. They're floating through the air constantly. The goal isn't removing every spore from a house. That's impossible. The real goal is stopping the environment that allows them to spread. And this is where copper starts becoming interesting. Because copper has been studied for years for its antimicrobial properties. Hospitals use copper surfaces. Some HVAC systems use copper components to reduce microbial buildup. Even agricultural buildings experimented with copper grounding systems around damp storage areas decades ago. Not because copper magically destroys all mold forever, but because some builders believed it helped reduce the conditions that mold thrives in. And honestly, once you start comparing old homes to modern ones, you begin noticing something strange. A lot of older buildings were designed around prevention. Modern homes are usually designed around treatment after the problem already appears. At first, I assumed this was probably just another internet myth. Because honestly, a copper wire stopping mold sounds like something you'd hear from a guy trying to sell miracle products out of his garage. But then I started looking into how copper is actually used today. And that's when things got interesting. Copper is naturally antimicrobial. That part is real. Hospitals use copper surfaces because certain bacteria survive on copper for much shorter periods of time compared to plastic or steel. Some HVAC systems use copper coils because microbial buildup tends to grow slower on them. Even old water systems relied heavily on copper long before modern chemical treatments existed. So the idea itself wasn't completely crazy. The real question was this: why were some older builders connecting copper directly into the ground near damp areas of homes? That's where the grounding part comes in. Older farmers believed moisture problems were sometimes worse in areas with poor airflow, trapped humidity,
and heavy static buildup around certain materials, especially basements, especially storage rooms, especially old wooden structures during wet seasons. And according to some builders, grounding copper into damp earth helped stabilize moisture conditions around the structure over long periods of time. Now, scientifically, there's still debate about how much impact grounding actually has on mold growth itself. Some people think the effect is minimal, others swear by it. But even skeptics agree on something important. Copper behaves very differently from most modern synthetic materials when exposed to moisture over time. And honestly, the deeper I went into this subject, the less this started feeling like magic wire and more like older builders simply understanding houses differently. Because older homes weren't designed to fight moisture after it appeared. They were designed to avoid trapping it in the first place. A few weeks later, I drove through rural Pennsylvania looking for some of the older farmhouses people kept mentioning online. And after a while, you start noticing patterns. The houses are old, really old. Some of them over 100 years old. But strangely, many of the basements didn't smell the way modern basements usually do. Less chemical smell, less trapped humidity, less stale air. The first thing you notice is airflow. Older farmhouses breathe constantly. Tiny air leaks around wood, stone foundations, natural ventilation through attics and crawl spaces. Modern homes try to stop air movement completely. Older homes allowed controlled movement naturally. And around several older barns and storage buildings, I started noticing grounded metal lines running near foundations and exterior walls. Not always copper, sometimes steel, sometimes older conductive materials. Simple systems. No apps, no electronics, no expensive installation crews. Just builders trying to manage moisture using passive methods instead of machines constantly running in the background. One older property owner told me something interesting. He said modern houses are built like coolers, everything sealed tightly, which is great for heating bills, until moisture gets trapped inside. Then the house slowly starts fighting itself. And honestly, once you hear that, it becomes hard to ignore. Because mold remediation today has become a massive industry. Dehumidifiers, air scrubbers, chemical sprays, moisture treatments. But older builders often focused on something much simpler, keeping the structure dry enough that mold struggled to grow in the first place.
The more I looked into this, the more I realized something strange. A lot of modern mold solutions are designed around constant maintenance. You buy the spray, then buy another one. You install the dehumidifier, then replace filters. Forever. You clean the wall, paint over it, wait a few months, then do it all again. And to be fair, some of those products absolutely help, but most of them treat visible mold after it already appears. Older builders seem to think differently. Instead of constantly fighting mold directly, they focused on controlling moisture before the mold had a chance to spread. That's why older homes often had features modern constructions slowly removed. Large attic ventilation, raised foundations, breathable materials, cross airflow through windows, stone basements instead of sealed drywall boxes. Homes were built to dry naturally, not stay perfectly sealed all year. And honestly, modern energy-efficient construction accidentally created a weird trade-off. Houses became better at keeping heat inside, but also better at trapping moisture, especially in bathrooms, laundry rooms, basements, closets. That's why some homes always seem to have that slightly damp smell, no matter how much cleaning happens. And once moisture stays trapped long enough, mold becomes almost inevitable. That's also why some builders still use surprisingly simple passive systems today. Ventilation gaps, drainage layers, grounding methods, natural airflow designs. Not because they're ancient secrets, because passive systems usually keep working quietly in the background without much maintenance. And honestly, that idea becomes more interesting the more expensive modern home maintenance keeps getting. The actual copper installation itself is surprisingly simple. That's probably one of the reasons this idea spreads so easily in rural areas. Most setups use a bare, solid copper wire connected to a grounding rod driven into damp soil outside the house. From there, the wire runs along the lower part of the basement wall or crawl space near moisture-prone areas. That's it. No complicated machinery, no electricity running through the wire, no expensive equipment. Some people attach the wire directly along wooden framing. Others place it closer to concrete foundations, where moisture buildup tends to happen first. And to be clear, this is not some magical, never clean mold again system. If a house has serious leaks, flooding, or major ventilation problems, copper wire alone obviously won't fix that. But some homeowners claim that after improving airflow and reducing moisture, grounding systems seem to help stabilize the environment long-term, especially in older homes. And honestly, even if only part of the claims are true, the bigger idea here is still fascinating. Because modern houses are filled with active systems constantly consuming power. Fans, purifiers, machines, filters, chemical treatments. Meanwhile, many older homes relied much more on passive design. Air movement, material choice, drainage, grounding, ventilation. Simple systems working quietly in the background without needing constant attention. And maybe that's the real reason people keep becoming fascinated by these older building methods. Not because they're magical, but because they were designed to last. And honestly, after spending weeks researching all of this, I don't think the most interesting part of the story is whether a copper wire can completely stop mold forever. It's the fact that older builders seem to understand something modern construction slowly moved away from. They build homes around prevention, around airflow, around moisture control, around durability. Not around constantly buying products to fight problems after they appear. And once you start noticing that pattern, you see it everywhere. Older houses weren't perfect. They wasted heat, they leaked air, they required maintenance. But many of them were also designed to breathe naturally in ways modern sealed homes often don't. And maybe that's why so many people are becoming interested in older building methods again. Not because they want to live in the 1800s, but because modern life has become incredibly dependent on systems that constantly need replacing, upgrading, filtering, or repairing. Sometimes the most interesting ideas aren't futuristic at all. Sometimes they're simple methods quietly left behind while the world rushed toward more complicated solutions. And whether this copper grounding method works exactly the way people claim or not, it still raises a fascinating question. How many old building techniques disappeared not because they failed, but because modern construction simply stopped paying attention to them?